Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom, and in today's video we're going to be rewriting my old code. Okay, so this JavaScript function right here was written by me about 8 years ago. I was just starting to learn JavaScript, so we're going to first analyze it and then we're going to rewrite it down here to make it conform to obviously DOM's 2020 standards. Okay, so the function itself, as we can see, is being used to apparently fetch messages. Okay, now it also takes in a chat table. Now when I first read this I was thinking, what is a chat table, right? So I don't know what this is. It could be an ID, a string, an object, an element, I'm not too sure. So let's assume, based on line number 2, this post request to fetch messages, let's assume this right here is fetching messages for a chat room. So this chat table is going to be a chat room ID. Let's just assume that when rewriting it. And anyway, going back to line number 2, and this right here is a post request to fetch messages. Obviously, right there, a post request should be used for sending data, and a get request is better suited to fetching or receiving data. So this right here probably should have been a get request back in the day. Anyway, that's actually quite self-explanatory. It's getting messages. Then line number 4. On line 4, we can see I've got a callback function for when the response comes back, and I've got the messages, and I'm simply just inserting these messages into the HTML of this div right here, this message container. So based on this, we can assume that the messages here in what gets returned is actually an HTML string. So we can assume all those things, and we're going to be rewriting it. Now, one more major flaw of this function is that I can't actually react to when the messages come back. So for example, if I was to call it down here, so fetch messages, pass through, for example, ID 15, okay, then once I do this, there's no way to react to when the messages have loaded. So ideally, I'd like to do something like this, where I have a function, okay, which will have the messages like this. Then I can do something inside here when the messages come back. And I would do this by then going inside here, having a callback, okay, and then inside here, I could call the callback and pass through messages, for example. So that is what I probably should have done, but like I said, we're going to be rewriting it using the fetch API. So let's get rid of all this stuff, and let's go down here and start the rewrite. So first off, let's rewrite the function itself, or the function head. So we can say function, then we can do fetch messages, and this right here, like I said, is going to take through a chat room ID. So I can say chat room ID just like that. And now from here we can actually return a promise based off a fetch request. So we can say return. Then we can use the fetch API. Now the reason for using the fetch API is because there probably isn't a real purpose to use jQuery in this small example. So it's much better to just use the native browser fetch API to make this request. Okay, so one difference here is this example is going to be using a get request. Okay, so we can pass through here php / fetch underscore messages dot php. You know what? We might actually use the template strings here. That way I can actually pass through our chat room ID in the query string. So I can do question mark, then I can say chat room ID is equal to, then pass through here our chat room ID, and we can also say encode URI component to ensure that we don't break the URL in the case that this ID contains bad characters for the URL. So now we have our fetch request. I can then say .then. I'm going to grab the response object right here. Then I can simply, from here, I can just return response.text. And the reason for using the text method here is because this right here, as we can see, is HTML. Ideally, it should probably be JSON some sort of JSON array containing messages, but in this example it is HTML, so interpreting it as text is going to work perfect for this example. Okay, now we can also add a bit of JS doc here. Okay, so I can say up here, bit of JS doc, and I can say param for chat room ID. I can say number, then I can say identifies a chat room on the server side, something like that. Okay, then I can say, fetches messages for a given chat room. Okay, now one more thing to add, we may as well add a returns here, and we can just say this returns a promise containing a string, because of course our string is the HTML which we are now going to use. So this function right here is actually complete. Okay, there is no more to do for this function, and the reason why I am not injecting this message container HTML inside here is because I don't want this function to be, I don't want it to be limited to inserting HTML into one specific element. I want to be able to call this function anywhere I want and then use the HTML however I want. Okay, so binding it to this makes it not very reusable and, multi-purpose, I guess. So instead, we're going to go down here and we're going to be calling the fetch messages method, then passing through here, for example, 15. And now, since we are returning a promise, I can simply say .then, and .then is going to contain my HTML. So I can say .html just like this. And now, of course, HTML is going to be the result of our text method down here. So this is actually going to contain the HTML string for the messages. So now I can simply say, something like document.query selector. I'm going to choose my element. In this case, let's just use message underscore container. Then I can say .inner HTML is equal to HTML right there. Okay, so that is all we need to do to rewrite that function. Now, the two main things here, okay, the two main things here is going to be the usage of obviously the fetch API instead of jQuery, and along with that, using a GET request instead of a POST request to retrieve data, which I think is quite important. That is number one and two. The third main thing here is definitely the way we are only using this function to retrieve messages and not tie it to, injecting messages to a particular element. Instead, in the usage of the method, we are then, deciding what to actually do with it inside here. If I got multiple different, panes on my page, I can do message container number 2 or something like that, along those lines. And of course now it's going to be a lot more reusable, and that's the whole point. So that is me rewriting my code from about 8 years ago. Okay, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later.